I still remember the day I came back from my trip and found nothing but dirt where my house used to be. Just 3 days. That's how long I was gone visiting my brother in the city. 3 days was all it took for Sarah Wilson and her stupid HOA to destroy everything I'd worked so hard to build. Before you watch full story, please comment down from which country are you watching. I would love to hear. My name is Mike Roberts, and this is the story of how the Pine Creek Estates HOA picked the absolute worst person to mess with. The funny thing is, I'm not even the type who goes looking for trouble. Most days, I'm just a regular guy who does his job at the county office and comes home to enjoy the peace and quiet. I like simple things, a good cup of coffee in the morning, the sound of birds in the trees around my property, and knowing that the land under my feet belongs to me, free and clear. But some people just can't stand seeing others live their lives without interference. Some people think rules are more important than common sense. And some people, like Sarah Wilson, believe their authority extends wherever they want it to. They couldn't have been more wrong. It all started 2 months ago when I finished rebuilding my grandfather's old cabin. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple log structure on my own land that had been in my family for over 50 years. I spent every weekend for a year fixing it up, replacing the roof, adding new windows, and making it livable again. The cabin meant something to me. My grandpa built it with his own hands back in 1967. I still have the black and white photo of him standing proudly in front of it, tool belt around his waist, smiling like he'd just conquered a mountain. When he passed away 5 years ago, the place fell into disrepair. I couldn't let it rot away. It was the last piece of him I had. I put my savings into restoring it, did most of the work myself. Each nail I hammered, each board I replaced felt like a conversation with him. "You're doing it wrong, Mikey," I could almost hear him saying when I messed up a measurement. Then I'd fix it, and somehow I knew he'd be nodding in approval. I was drinking coffee on the porch one morning, admiring my finished work, when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. A shiny black SUV pulled up, and out stepped a woman in a blazer clutching a clipboard like it was the most important thing in the world. "Excuse me," she called out, not bothering to introduce herself. "This structure doesn't meet our community standards." I took another sip of coffee. "And you are?" "Sarah Wilson. I'm the president of Pine Creek Estates Homeowners Association." She said it like I should be impressed. "Nice to meet you, Sarah." I'm like, "This is my property and I don't remember joining any HOA." She gave me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Your property borders our development. The exterior of your cabin is visible from some of our premium lots. It's affecting property values." I set my mug down. "This land has been in my family since before your development even existed. I'm not part of your HOA." She walked closer, her heels sinking slightly into the soft ground. I noticed how she looked at everything with disapproval, the natural wood exterior, the stone path I'd laid by hand, even the bird feeder hanging from the porch. "Perhaps you're not aware of the neighborhood covenant," she said, flipping through papers on her clipboard. "All properties in and adjacent to Pine Creek Estates are subject to our architectural guidelines. Your structure clearly violates at least 7 of them." I stood up. "Show me where I signed that covenant." She blinked, caught off guard. "It's implied by your property's location." "Nothing about property law is implied, ma'am. I work for the county records office. I know exactly where my property lines are and what agreements are attached to my deed. And there's nothing about your HOA on any of it." Her face hardened. "We'll see about that." She looked around with another disapproving glance. "You'll be hearing from us." As she walked back to her SUV, I called after her. "Next time, try knocking on the door and saying hello before making threats. That's how neighbors normally behave." She didn't look back, just got in her vehicle and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust behind her. I didn't think much of it at the time. Just another power-hungry HOA president who didn't know where her authority ended. I should have taken her more seriously. The letters start coming. A week later, the first letter arrived. "Notice of violation," in big red letters across the top. It claimed my cabin violated rules about aesthetic harmony and approved construction materials. The letter demanded I tear it down within 30 days or face daily fines of $100. I almost laughed reading it. The nerve of these people. They had absolutely no authority over my property, yet here they were, trying to force me to demolish my own home. I called the county office where I worked as a property records specialist and asked my colleague Jenny to pull the official boundaries. "You're definitely not in Pine Creek Estates," she confirmed after checking the maps. "You're not even close to their property line. There's a good quarter-mile buffer of forest between you and their nearest lot. They have zero jurisdiction over your land." That's what I thought, I said. Can you send me the official survey and property lines? I need to set these people straight. Jenny emailed me the documents within the hour. I printed everything out, my deed, the property survey, the building permits approved by the county, and photos of the completed cabin showing it met all code requirements. I wrote a polite but firm letter explaining that 1. My property was not part of Pine Creek Estates. 2. I had never signed any HOA agreement. 3. All construction was permitted and up to code. 4. They had no legal authority to demand changes to my property. I sent it certified mail, return receipt requested, so they couldn't claim they never got it. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. 3 days later, a thicker envelope arrived. Inside was another violation notice, this one claiming my cabin was an unpermitted structure and built without proper authorization. They'd increased the daily fine to $250 and added a one-time administrative fee of $500. This time I was angry. They were just making things up now, completely ignoring the documentation I'd sent proving I had all the necessary permits. I called the HOA office and asked to speak to Sarah Wilson. Ms. Wilson is unavailable, said the receptionist. Can I take a message? Tell her Mike Roberts called about the fraudulent violation notices. I've already provided proof that my property is not under HOA jurisdiction, and all construction was properly permitted. If I receive one more notice, I'll be filing a harassment complaint. The receptionist's voice became noticeably cooler. I'll pass along your message. 2 days later, another letter arrived. This one was from Pine Creek Estates legal department, though I doubted they actually had in-house lawyers. It claimed my cabin was visible from community property, and therefore subject to their viewshed regulations. They demanded I either tear it down or build a 10-foot privacy fence around my entire property. At the bottom was a handwritten note. Perhaps this will help you understand we're serious. SW. I kept every single notice in a folder, documenting the harassment. I even sent a certified letter to the entire HOA board explaining my position again, including even more detailed documentation. I attached highlighted copies of county ordinances that clearly showed they had no authority over properties outside their development. Their response? Another violation notice with an increased fine, now up to $500 per day. This one claimed my cabin was a fire hazard, despite being built with fire-resistant materials and meeting all county safety codes. The notices kept coming. Each one made new claims. Unauthorized dwelling. Wildlife habitat disruption. Watershed contamination risk. Unpermitted septic system. Excessive tree removal. None of these claims were true. My property had passed every inspection with flying colors. I had all the documentation to prove it. But Sarah Wilson seemed determined to drive me away. After the 10th notice, I contacted a lawyer friend, Raj, who specialized in property disputes. This is harassment, plain and simple, he said after reviewing the letters. They're trying to bully you off your land. They probably want to buy it cheap and expand their development. What should I do? I asked. Document everything. Keep all correspondence. If they continue, we can file for a cease and desist order. I followed his advice, making copies of everything and saving emails. I installed security cameras around the property, just in case they tried to trespass. I even put up no trespassing signs along my property line. For a few weeks, things were quiet. I thought maybe they'd finally gotten the message and decided to leave me alone. I was wrong. They were just planning their next move. Then came my brother's birthday. I packed a bag, locked up the cabin, and drove 3 hours to the city. We had a great weekend catching up, dinner at his favorite restaurant, watching the game, talking about old times. I mentioned the HOA situation and he thought it was ridiculous. You should take them to court, he said. Sue them for harassment. I'm documenting everything, I told him. If they keep it up, I will. Sunday evening, I said my goodbyes and drove back, feeling relaxed and happy. The weekend away had been good for me, a chance to forget about Sarah Wilson and her threats for a few days. That feeling lasted until I turned onto my road. At first, I thought I had somehow taken a wrong turn. The cabin should have been visible from the bend in the road, but I couldn't see it. I blinked, confused, and drove closer, my stomach sinking with each passing second. I slammed on the brakes when I reached my property. The clearing where my cabin had stood was empty. Not just empty, deliberately cleared. Where my cabin had stood was nothing but flattened dirt and a few broken boards. My front porch steps led to nothing. A single window frame lay broken on the ground. The rest was gone. Completely demolished. I sat in my truck, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I got out slowly like I was in a dream and walked to the center of where my home had been. Boot prints were everywhere in the soft dirt. Tread marks from heavy equipment. This wasn't vandalism. This was deliberate, planned destruction. Someone had brought in machinery and workers to tear down my home while I was away. And I knew exactly who had done it. I felt something I'd never felt before, a kind of cold rage that made everything around me seem sharp and clear. My grandfather's cabin, the place where I'd spent summers as a kid, the home I'd lovingly restored with my own hands, reduced to splinters and dirt because some HOA president decided she didn't like looking at it. I picked up a broken piece of the hand-carved railing I'd installed just a month ago. Then I noticed something half buried in the dirt, the framed photo of my grandfather that had hung by the door. The glass was shattered, but his face was still visible through the cracks. That broke something inside me. Not in a way that made me want to scream or cry. In a way that made me determined to make sure justice was served. I took out my phone and started taking pictures, documenting everything. I walked the entire property, photographing tread marks, collecting broken pieces of my home, looking for anything that might identify who had done this. I found a receipt from a local hardware store dropped near where the back door had been. It wasn't mine. I called Raj immediately. "They demolished my cabin," I said when he answered. "The whole thing. It's gone." "What?" He sounded shocked. "Are you sure it was them? Who else would it be? Sarah Wilson has been threatening to tear it down for months. She finally did it." "Don't touch anything else," he said. "I'm calling the sheriff. This is criminal destruction of property." While I waited for the sheriff, I sat in my truck, still trying to process what had happened. Everything I owned was gone. Clothes, books, my grandfather's woodworking tools that I'd kept in a special cabinet, all destroyed or stolen. I looked at the photo of my grandfather again, his face now bisected by a crack in the glass. "I'll make this right," I promised him. "They won't get away with this." Deputy Carson arrived 40 minutes later. He was a big man with a handlebar mustache and eyes that didn't miss much. He whistled low when he saw the destruction. "You're saying someone demolished your entire house while you were gone for the weekend?" he asked, surveying the scene. "Yes. And I'm pretty sure I know who did it. The Pine Creek Estates HOA has been sending me threatening letters for months, demanding I tear it down." I showed him my folder of documentation. He flipped through it, his expression growing darker with each page. "This is unusual," he said finally. "Most HOA disputes involve fines or lawn ornaments, not demolishing someone's home. You're sure you're not actually part of their association?" "Positive. My property isn't even connected to their development. They have no legal authority here." He nodded, taking more notes. "I'm going to need statements from neighbors, anyone who might have seen something." "You have security cameras?" "I did," I said bitterly. "They were attached to the cabin." He looked around again. "This isn't just trespassing or vandalism. This is criminal destruction of property, possibly breaking and entering, theft. We're talking felony charges here." "Good," I said. "Because I want whoever did this prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." "First things first," he said. "We need to confirm who was responsible. I'm going to pay a visit to this Sarah Wilson." "I'm coming with you," I said. He shook his head. "That's not a good idea. Let me handle the initial contact. I need you to make a list of everything that was in the cabin. Estimated values too for the insurance claim." I wanted to argue, but he was right. Getting confrontational now could complicate things legally. Better to let the law take its course. "Fine," I said. "But I'll be attending their HOA meeting tomorrow night. And I want answers. Just don't do anything that could jeopardize the case," he cautioned. "These kinds of people, they think rules don't apply to them. Let's prove them wrong the right way." I nodded, but in my mind I was already planning what I would say when I faced Sarah Wilson and her board. They had no idea who they were dealing with, but they were about to find out. I barely slept that night. I stayed in a motel in town since I no longer had a home to go back to. My mind kept replaying images of my destroyed cabin, imagining the moment when the walls came down, when my grandfather's photo crashed to the floor. The next morning I drove to the county office and went straight to my boss, Linda. "Mike, you look terrible," she said when I walked in. "What happened?" I told her everything. By the time I finished, her face had turned from concern to outrage. "They did what?" she exclaimed. "On what authority?" "None," I said. "That's the point. They had absolutely no legal right to touch my property." Linda shook her head. "This is beyond an HOA overstepping. This is criminal. What do you need from us? Time off to deal with this. And maybe access to some of the archived records. I need to know everything about Pine Creek Estates, when it was established, what their actual boundaries are, and who approved their HOA covenant. Take whatever time you need, she said. And use any resources we have. This isn't just about your cabin anymore. If they're forging documents or claiming authority they don't have, that's a county issue too. I spent the morning digging through property records. Pine Creek Estates was only 8 years old, built on what used to be farmland. My property predated it by decades. There was no possible way they could claim jurisdiction over my land. I also found something interesting. Sarah Wilson had only owned property in Pine Creek for 3 years, but she'd become HOA president just 6 months after moving in. According to the records, she worked for a real estate development company that specialized in acquiring land adjacent to existing developments and expanding them. Things were starting to make more sense. At 7 p.m. sharp, I walked into the Pine Creek Estates Community Center where the monthly HOA meeting was just starting. The room was set up with rows of chairs facing a long table where the board members sat. Sarah Wilson sat at the head of the table in a cream-colored suit, looking like she was running a Fortune 500 company instead of a neighborhood group. Her smile dropped when she saw me. Mr. Roberts. This is a private meeting for residents only. Several people turned to look at me. I walked to the front of the room, standing directly across from Sarah. My cabin is gone, I said, my voice steady despite the anger boiling inside me. Demolished while I was out of town. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? The room went silent. A few board members shifted uncomfortably, but Sarah just raised her chin. The association removed an unauthorized structure after multiple notices of non-compliance. Everything was done according to our bylaws. Murmurs spread through the room. Clearly, most residents had no idea what she was talking about. I placed my folder on the table and opened it. This land survey shows my property is outside your HOA boundaries. These are my building permits, all properly approved by the county. And this, I pulled out another document, is my deed showing I've owned this land for years before Pine Creek Estates even existed. Sarah barely glanced at the papers. We determined the structure violated our community guidelines. The matter is closed. What do you mean, we? Asked an older man sitting at the table with the other board members. The board never voted on any demolition. Sarah shot him a look. We discussed problem properties last month, Peter. We discussed fences and lawn ornaments, Peter replied. Not demolishing someone's home. I turned to the residents in the room. How many of you knew that your HOA president ordered the demolition of a home outside your community boundaries? Blank faces and shaking heads answered me. Nobody knew. That's when I played my trump card. Do you know what I do for a living, Sarah? I asked. She rolled her eyes. I don't see how that's relevant. I'm the senior records administrator for the entire county. Every property deed, every land survey, every building permit crosses my desk. My signature is on every single legal document in this county, including the ones that established Pine Creek Estates in the first place. Her face paled slightly. You trespassed on private property and illegally demolished a permitted structure. That's not just against HOA rules. That's criminal. Is this true, Sarah? Asked a woman in the front row. Did you order a demolition without board approval? Sarah's eyes darted around the room, but her voice didn't waver. I acted in the best interest of the community. That eyesore was bringing down property values. It wasn't even visible from most of the community, Peter said. And it certainly wasn't on HOA property. You can't expect us to keep track of every piece of land around this development, Sarah snapped. Mistakes happen. You didn't make a mistake, I said. You hired a demolition crew, bypassed a locked gate, and bulldozed a permitted structure without a court order. That's not a mistake. That's criminal trespass and destruction of property. The room had gone silent. Even the guy checking his phone in the back row was paying attention now. The sheriff is investigating, I continued. And my attorney will be filing a lawsuit against both you personally and the HOA as an organization. I suggest you all prepare for some significant legal expenses. Sarah leaned back in her chair like she was trying to sink into it. This meeting is adjourned, she announced. No, it's not, said Peter, standing up. I move that we immediately suspend Sarah Wilson from her position as president pending investigation of these allegations. I second, said another board member quickly. You can't do that, Sarah protested. The bylaws. Article 7, Section 3, recited Peter. Any board member accused of malfeasance may be suspended by majority vote of the remaining board. A quick vote was held. It was unanimous. Sarah Wilson was suspended effective immediately. As the meeting descended into chaos, I turned and walked out. I'd said what I needed to say. Now it was time to let the legal system do its work. In the parking lot, Peter caught up with me. "Mr. Roberts, I want you to know that the board had no knowledge of this. Sarah's been acting unilaterally on a lot of things lately, but this is beyond anything we imagined." "I believe you," I said. "But that doesn't change what happened. My home is gone. Everything I owned was in that cabin." He nodded gravely. "We'll cooperate fully with the investigation. And speaking personally, I hope she faces consequences for this. It's not right." "No," I agreed. "It's not. And I'm going to make sure everyone involved is held accountable." As I drove back to the motel, my phone rang. It was Deputy Carson. "Roberts? You were right. The demolition company confirmed they were hired by Sarah Wilson. She gave them forged documents showing your property was part of the HOA common land." "Forged documents?" I repeated. "Can you prove that?" "They gave us copies of everything. The letterhead looks official, but the property description was altered. And get this, she forged the signature of a county official to authorize the demolition." "Let me guess," I said. "My signature?" "Bingo," he replied. "She copied it from some permit documents. Not a great forgery, but good enough to fool a demolition crew that didn't look too closely." "That's multiple felonies," I said. "Yes, it is. We're bringing her in for questioning tomorrow." "Thought you'd want to know." I thanked him and hung up. Things were moving faster than I expected. But there was still a long way to go before justice would be served. I drove straight to the sheriff's office the next morning to give my formal statement. Deputy Carson met me in the lobby. "Perfect timing," he said. "The detective assigned to your case just got in." He led me to a small conference room where a woman in a blazer was setting up a laptop. She looked up when we entered. "Mr. Roberts? I'm Detective Ramirez. I'll be leading the investigation into the destruction of your property." We spent the next 2 hours going through everything: the harassment letters, my responses, the property records, and the demolition itself. I provided her with all the documentation I had, including photos of the cabin before and after. "This is one of the more clear-cut cases I've seen," she said, reviewing my files. "The property boundaries aren't even in dispute. Your land is well outside the HOA territory." "That's what makes this so crazy," I said. "They had no plausible claim to jurisdiction, yet they demolished my home anyway." "People with a little bit of power sometimes think they have more than they do," she replied. "Especially in HOAs. But this goes way beyond overzealous enforcement." She showed me a preliminary report. "We've already interviewed 2 of your neighbors who saw the demolition crew. They confirmed it happened on Saturday around 10 a.m. Neither of them questioned it because the workers had what looked like official paperwork." "And Sarah Wilson? Have you spoken to her?" Detective Ramirez nodded. "We brought her in this morning. She's claiming the board authorized the action, but we've already interviewed 3 board members who deny any knowledge. She's also claiming your property was shown as HOA common land on their maps." "That's absurd," I said. "The county records clearly show." "We know," she interrupted. "That's why we're also investigating forgery and falsifying documents. The demolition company turned over paperwork that appears to have been altered." Just then the door opened and the county prosecutor, James Chen, walked in. I knew him from the courthouse, though we'd never worked directly together. "Mike," he said, shaking my hand. "I heard what happened. I wanted to personally assure you that we're taking this very seriously." "How serious are we talking?" I asked. "We're looking at multiple felony charges," he said. "Criminal trespass, destruction of property, forgery of official documents, possibly fraud and conspiracy. If everything checks out the way it appears, Ms. Wilson is facing significant jail time." The weight of it hit me. This wasn't just about getting my cabin back or making Sarah Wilson pay for what she'd done. This was about holding someone accountable for breaking the law in a profound way. "What happens next?" I asked. "We continue gathering evidence," Detective Ramirez said. "We'll be interviewing the demolition company crew members, reviewing all communications between Sarah Wilson and them, and analyzing the forged documents." "And in the meantime?" I asked. "I still don't have a home." James Chen looked thoughtful. "Your homeowner's insurance should cover temporary housing while this is being resolved. And once we file charges, we can request the court to order emergency restitution." I nodded. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. One more thing, I said. I want to speak with the demolition company. I want to hear directly from them how this happened. Detective Ramirez hesitated. That's not typically how. I think we can arrange it, Chin interrupted. As long as you understand that anything they tell you might be used in the case. I understand, I said. I just need to know how someone could tear down an entire home without making sure they had the legal right to do so. Chin nodded. I'll set it up. Valley Demolition was located in a small industrial park on the edge of town. The office was a simple prefab building with a gravel parking lot and a yard full of equipment. I arrived at 2 p.m. as arranged by the prosecutor's office. The owner, Bill Rafferty, met me at the door. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with calloused hands and a deeply lined face. He looked uncomfortable when he saw me. Mr. Roberts, he said, extending his hand. I'm Bill. I just want to say how sorry I am about what happened. I shook his hand but didn't smile. I appreciate that. I'm here to understand how it happened. He led me into a small office with metal filing cabinets and a desk covered in papers and coffee mugs. Look, he said before I could ask anything, I've been in business for 22 years. Never had anything like this happen before. If I'd known that property wasn't part of the HOA, I never would have touched it. How did you not know? I asked. Didn't you check the property records? Verify the permits. Bill sighed heavily. We should have. That's on me. But Sarah Wilson showed us what looked like legitimate paperwork. Had the county seal, signatures, everything. He pulled a file from his cabinet and laid it on the desk. Here's everything she gave us. I already provided copies to the police, but you can look through it yourself. I opened the file. Inside was a work order on Pine Creek Estates letterhead, authorizing the removal of an abandoned structure on common land. There was a map showing my property incorrectly labeled as part of the HOA, and a document that appeared to be a county demolition permit. I examined the permit closely. It had my signature on it, or rather, a poor copy of my signature, clearly taken from another document and pasted onto this one. This is a forgery, I said. I never signed this. And this property description has been altered. Bill nodded miserably. The police pointed that out. In hindsight, we should have verified directly with the county. But she was so confident, said it was an urgent safety issue that needed immediate attention. Did she come to the site during the demolition? She was there the whole time, he confirmed. Supervised everything. Even told the crew to make sure nothing was left standing. My jaw tightened. And none of your workers thought it was strange to demolish a fully furnished cabin? Didn't anyone question why there were personal belongings inside? Bill looked even more uncomfortable. She told them you'd abandoned the property, that you'd taken anything of value. Said the rest was just trash left behind. And they believed that? Look, my crew does what they're paid to do. If someone has the proper paperwork and authority, it's not their job to question it. He hesitated. Though I will say my foreman mentioned something didn't feel right. Too many personal items still there. But when he asked Sarah about it, she insisted it had been abandoned for months. I tried to keep my voice steady. What happened to my belongings? Sarah had a dumpster brought in. Everything went in there. Everything? I felt sick. Family photos? My grandfather's tools? Everything just thrown away. Bill couldn't meet my eyes. I'm sorry. By the time we realized something was wrong, the dumpster had already been emptied at the landfill. I took a deep breath, trying to contain my anger. This wasn't Bill's fault, not entirely. He should have verified the paperwork, but Sarah Wilson was the one who set this whole thing in motion. I need copies of everything, I said. The work order, the communications between you and Sarah, receipts, crew logs, everything. Of course, Bill said. He seemed relieved to have something practical to do. I'll get it all together for you right now. While he gathered the documents, I looked through the file more carefully. There was an email chain between Sarah and Bill discussing the eyesore that needed to be removed. She had repeatedly emphasized the urgency, claiming the structure was a safety hazard that could threaten nearby homes. She had planned this meticulously, creating fake documents and pressuring the demolition company to act quickly before anyone could ask too many questions. Here's everything, Bill said, handing me a thick envelope. And for what it's worth, I've already told my crew that we never take down any structure without triple verification from now on. County records, property owner, and independent survey. This won't happen again. Too late for my home, I said, taking the envelope. I know. And I can't fix that. But I will testify against Sarah Wilson. What she did was wrong and she needs to face consequences. I nodded. Good. Because this isn't over. Not by a long shot. As I walked to my car, my phone rang. It was Detective Ramirez. Mr. Roberts? We just got the warrant to search Sarah Wilson's home and office. You might want to come down to the station. There's something you should see. I arrived at the police station to find Detective Ramirez and Prosecutor Chin waiting for me. They led me to a conference room where several evidence boxes sat on the table. We executed search warrants on Sarah Wilson's home, office, and vehicle today, Detective Ramirez explained. What we found confirms everything you've told us and more. She opened one of the boxes and carefully removed a folder with an evidence tag. This was in her home office, hidden in a false bottom drawer. It contains files on several properties bordering Pine Creek Estates, including yours. She handed me a document protected in a clear plastic sleeve. It was a draft letter on Pine Creek Estates letterhead, outlining plans to acquire adjacent properties for Phase 2 expansion. There's more, Chin said. We found emails between Sarah and her employer, Liberty Development Group. She's not just the HOA president, she's a project manager for the company that wants to expand the development. So this was never about community standards or property values? I said, realization dawning. She wanted my land. Exactly, Ramirez nodded. And your cabin was in the way. According to these documents, Liberty Development has been trying to buy all the land surrounding Pine Creek Estates. Most owners sold, but a few, including you, refused. Chin pulled out another document. This is where it gets even more interesting. We found this unofficial map that shows how they plan to redraw property lines to claim parts of bordering properties through adverse possession. That's ridiculous, I said. Adverse possession takes years of open use, and they'd have to prove they were maintaining and using the land. None of that applies to my property. They knew that, Chin replied. But they were hoping to bully or intimidate holdouts into giving up. When that didn't work with you, Sarah apparently decided to take more drastic action. The smoking gun is this, Ramirez said, showing me a handwritten note. It's from Sarah's planner. It says, "Are out of town this weekend. Perfect opportunity. Call Bill." I felt my anger rising again. So she specifically waited until I was away to demolish my cabin. It looks that way, Chin confirmed. This was premeditated destruction of property. And now we have proof that she was acting as an agent of Liberty Development while using her position as HOA president. That's a conflict of interest at best, Detective Ramirez added. And fraud at worst. She never disclosed to the HOA board or residents that she worked for a company trying to buy up surrounding land. How soon can you file charges? I asked. We're preparing the paperwork now, Chin said. I'd like to have her arraigned by the end of the week. And Liberty Development? I asked. Are they going to face consequences too? Chin and Ramirez exchanged glances. We're still investigating their involvement, Chin said carefully. If we can prove they directed or knew about Sarah's actions, they could face corporate charges. But these kinds of companies are good at maintaining plausible deniability. I nodded, understanding the reality of how these things often worked. So what's next? We're going to arrest Sarah Wilson today, Detective Ramirez said. The evidence is overwhelming. She'll be charged with criminal trespass, destruction of property, forgery of official documents, and fraud. We'll also be filing for an emergency injunction against both her and Liberty Development, Chin added, to prevent them from taking any further action against neighboring properties while this case is ongoing. I left the station feeling a mix of emotions. There was satisfaction in knowing Sarah would face justice, but it didn't change the fact that my home and possessions were gone. Some things, like my grandfather's photo and tools, could never be replaced. The next day, Sarah Wilson's arrest made front-page news in the local paper. HOA president arrested for illegal home demolition, read the headline. The article detailed how she had ordered the destruction of a cabin outside HOA jurisdiction using forged documents. My phone started ringing almost immediately. First it was neighbors checking if I was okay. Then it was reporters wanting comments. I directed them all to James Chin at the prosecutor's office. I wasn't interested in becoming a media sensation. I just wanted justice. Meanwhile, my attorney Raj filed a civil lawsuit against Sarah Wilson, the HOA as an organization, Valley Demolition, and Liberty Development Group. The suit sought damages for the full cost of rebuilding the cabin, replacement of all lost possessions, emotional distress, punitive damages, legal fees. This lawsuit isn't just about getting compensation, Raj explained. It's about sending a message. No one has the right to destroy your property, no matter what authority they think they have. Sarah Wilson was released on bail the following day. She had been ordered to surrender her passport and had a restraining order preventing her from coming anywhere near my property. Liberty Development quickly issued a statement claiming they had no knowledge of her actions and were deeply concerned by the allegations. "They're distancing themselves from her," Raj said when I showed him the statement. "They're going to try to paint her as a rogue employee who acted on her own initiative." "Do you believe that?" I asked. "Not for a second," he replied. "But proving corporate involvement is always challenging. Let's focus on what we can prove." A week after Sarah's arrest, Pine Creek Estates held another community meeting. This time I was formally invited by the acting board president, Peter. The mood in the room was somber as residents tried to process what had happened. "On behalf of the entire community, I want to apologize for what was done to your property," Peter said at the beginning of the meeting. "The actions taken by Sarah Wilson were unauthorized, illegal, and do not reflect the values of our community." Many residents nodded in agreement. A few looked embarrassed, perhaps remembering how they had silently allowed Sarah to accumulate so much power. "We've conducted an internal audit," Peter continued, "and we've discovered that this isn't the first time Sarah has acted without board approval. She's issued unauthorized fines, sent threatening letters to other neighboring properties, and even altered meeting minutes to make it appear that certain actions had been voted on." An older woman stood up. "My garden gnomes," she said angrily. "She made me pay a $350 fine for unapproved lawn ornaments last spring. Was that even legitimate?" Peter shook his head. "No, Mrs. Peterson. That fine was never approved by the board, and the gnome restriction was added to the bylaws without a proper vote." The room erupted in angry murmurs as others began to share similar stories. It seemed Sarah Wilson had been running the HOA like her personal fiefdom, enforcing rules that didn't exist and pocketing at least some of the fines. "What happens now?" someone asked. "First, we're cooperating fully with the criminal investigation and Mr. Roberts' civil lawsuit," Peter explained. "Second, we're completely restructuring the HOA governance to ensure this can never happen again. And third," he looked directly at me, "we want to make things right with Mr. Roberts to the extent that's possible." I hadn't expected that last part. "Make things right how?" I asked. "The board has voted to establish a fund to help rebuild your cabin," Peter said. "It won't cover everything, but it's a start. We've also reached out to local contractors who are willing to donate materials and labor." I was genuinely surprised. "Thank you," I said. "That's unexpected." "It's the least we can do," Peter replied. "What happened to you was wrong, and our community bears some responsibility for not providing proper oversight." As the meeting continued, I found myself with mixed feelings. I appreciated the gesture from the community, but it didn't erase what had happened. And I knew that whatever they contributed would be a fraction of what was needed to truly make me whole. But maybe it was a start toward healing the rift that Sarah Wilson had created. Over the next few months, both the criminal case against Sarah Wilson and my civil lawsuit moved forward. The prosecutor's office added more charges as additional evidence came to light. Not only had she forged documents and illegally demolished my cabin, but she had also embezzled HOA funds, falsified meeting minutes, and intimidated board members who questioned her decisions. The civil case expanded as well. During discovery, we found emails between Sarah and executives at Liberty Development discussing ways to remove obstacles to their expansion plans. While they never explicitly mentioned demolishing my cabin, there was enough implied approval to make a compelling case that the company knew what she was doing. "They're going to settle," Raj predicted after reviewing the evidence. "They can't afford to let this go to trial. The publicity would be devastating." He was right. 2 days before the first scheduled court appearance, Liberty Development's attorneys reached out with a settlement offer. They would pay for the complete reconstruction of my cabin, replacement of all lost possessions, and substantial additional damages. In return, I would drop all claims against the company and sign a non-disclosure agreement. "What do you think?" I asked Raj after he presented the offer. "It's a good offer financially," he admitted, "but the NDA would prevent you from ever discussing Liberty's involvement. The truth would never come out." I shook my head. "Then no deal. This isn't just about the money. It's about accountability." Raj smiled. "That's what I told them you'd say. Here's my counteroffer. They pay even more in damages but no NDA. And they have to publicly acknowledge what happened and apologize." "Will they go for that?" "Let's find out," he said. 2 days later, Liberty Development came back with a modified offer. They would pay everything we asked and issue a public statement acknowledging serious errors in judgment by their employee, Sarah Wilson. They wouldn't admit direct corporate involvement, but they would apologize and pledge to change their business practices. It's the best we're going to get without going to trial, Raj advised. And a trial could take years. I thought about it overnight and decided to accept. The important thing was that they were being forced to take responsibility, even if they weren't admitting full culpability. Meanwhile, Sarah Wilson was fighting the criminal charges. She had hired an expensive defense attorney who was trying to argue that she believed she was acting within her authority as HOA president. She's going to claim it was all a misunderstanding, Detective Ramirez told me during an update meeting. That she genuinely thought your property was part of the HOA territory. That's ridiculous, I said. I showed her documentation proving otherwise multiple times. We know, James Chin assured me. We have all your certified letters. And the forged documents blow her defense out of the water. She knew exactly what she was doing. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a month later. I would need to testify about the harassment leading up to the demolition and formally identify the forged signature as a copy of my own. In the meantime, the settlement money from Liberty Development arrived, and I began working with an architect to design a new cabin. It would be similar to the original but built to even higher standards, with better insulation, updated wiring, and a more spacious layout. I wanted to honor my grandfather's vision while creating something that would last for generations. The day of Sarah Wilson's preliminary hearing arrived on a rainy Tuesday. The courthouse was packed with reporters, curious locals, and several Pine Creek Estates residents who wanted to see justice done. Sarah sat at the defense table in a conservative gray suit, looking much less commanding than she had during the HOA meetings. Her attorney, a slick man in an expensive suit, whispered something to her as I walked in. James Chin guided me to the prosecution table. Just tell the truth, he advised. Answer the questions directly and don't let her attorney rattle you. The judge entered and the hearing began. The prosecution presented the evidence first: the harassing letters, the forged demolition permit, the emails discussing the cabin as an obstacle to development plans, and my testimony about the destruction. When I described coming home to find my cabin completely demolished, several people in the courtroom gasped. The judge herself looked disturbed by the account. Sarah's attorney tried to paint it as a bureaucratic mix-up. My client genuinely believed the property in question fell under HOA jurisdiction, he argued. This was an unfortunate misunderstanding, not a criminal act. A misunderstanding? Chin responded incredulously. Ms. Wilson received multiple certified letters proving Mr. Roberts' property was outside HOA boundaries. She forged Mr. Roberts' signature on county documents. She personally supervised the demolition to ensure nothing was left standing. These are not the actions of someone who made an innocent mistake. The defense tried to shift blame to Valley Demolition for not verifying the paperwork properly, but that strategy fell apart when Bill Rafferty testified about how Sarah had pressured his company to act quickly, claiming it was an urgent safety issue. By the end of the hearing, the judge had heard enough. There is substantial evidence to support all charges, she ruled. This case will proceed to trial. As we left the courtroom, James Chin looked satisfied. We're in a strong position. Her defense is falling apart already. What do you think will happen now? I asked. Her attorney will push for a plea deal, he predicted. And given the evidence, we're in a position to demand significant consequences. He was right again. A week later, Sarah's attorney approached the prosecutor's office about a possible plea agreement. After several rounds of negotiation, they reached a deal. Sarah would plead guilty to criminal destruction of property, forgery, and fraud in exchange for a reduced sentence. The terms were still substantial: 2 years in prison, 5 years of probation, full restitution for my losses, and a lifetime ban from serving on any HOA board or working in property development. Should I accept it? I asked Chin when he presented the deal. It spares you a lengthy trial, he pointed out. And the sentence is still significant for a first-time offender. Most importantly, she's accepting full responsibility for what she did. I thought about it carefully. Part of me wanted to see her face a jury of her peers and receive the maximum possible sentence. But another part just wanted this chapter of my life to be over so I could focus on rebuilding. Okay, I said finally. I'll accept the plea deal. With the legal matters largely resolved, I threw myself into rebuilding my cabin. The settlement from Liberty Development more than covered the costs, allowing me to use higher quality materials and add some features I'd always wanted, like a wraparound porch and a proper stone fireplace. Many of the Pine Creek Estates residents made good on their promise to help. Some came by on weekends to help with construction. Others donated furniture or kitchenware to replace what I'd lost. One family even had a woodworker friend create a new display cabinet for my grandfather's tools, or at least the ones I was able to replace. Most meaningful of all, Peter and several other residents helped me search through the landfill where my belongings had been dumped. It was a messy, unpleasant task, but after 2 days of digging, we found a few irreplaceable items, including, miraculously, the cracked but intact photo of my grandfather. "Thank you," I said to Peter as we carefully placed the photo in my truck. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes, we did," he replied simply. "It was our community that hurt you, even if most of us didn't know about it. We need to be part of making it right." As the new cabin took shape, I installed a security system with cameras covering every inch of the property. I also put up a proper fence marking my boundaries with clear, "No trespassing" signs. I wasn't taking any chances this time. 3 months after construction began, the new cabin was finished. It looked similar to the original from the outside, honoring my grandfather's design, but inside it was modern and comfortable. I held a small housewarming party and invited the neighbors who had helped, including several from Pine Creek Estates. As we sat on the new porch watching the sunset, Peter raised his glass in a toast. "To new beginnings," he said. "And to learning from the past," I added. Sarah Wilson's sentencing hearing was held 6 months after the demolition of my cabin. The courtroom was packed again as she stood before the judge in a simple dark suit, looking nothing like the confident, clipboard-wielding HOA president I'd first met. "Ms. Wilson," the judge began, "you abused a position of trust, forged official documents, and destroyed someone's home, not out of necessity or even strong emotion, but simply because it stood in the way of your employer's development plans. This court cannot overlook such a calculated disregard for others' rights and property." Sarah kept her eyes down as the judge continued. "You will serve 18 months in state prison followed by 5 years of probation. You are ordered to pay full restitution to Mr. Roberts, as outlined in the plea agreement. And you are permanently barred from serving on any property owners association or working in real estate development." After the sentencing, as I walked out of the courthouse, a reporter asked how I felt about the outcome. "Justice was served," I said simply. "Not just for me but for everyone who's ever dealt with someone who abused their authority. Your home is supposed to be your sanctuary, whether it's a mansion or a simple cabin in the woods. No one has the right to take that away from you." Liberty Development faced its own consequences. After the details of the case became public, their reputation took a significant hit. Several of their development projects were blocked by concerned community groups, and they eventually sold their stake in Pine Creek Estates to another company. The Pine Creek Estates HOA, under Peter's leadership, completely rewrote their bylaws to ensure transparency and prevent any future abuses of power. They implemented strict rules requiring board approval for any enforcement actions, regular financial audits, and clear communication with all residents. They also created what they called the Roberts Rule, a formal acknowledgement that their authority stopped at their property lines with no exceptions. As for me, I settled back into life in my new cabin, more appreciative than ever of the peace and simplicity it represented. On clear evenings, I sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sunset just like my grandfather used to do. The repaired photo of him hangs by the door, the crack in the glass a reminder of what happened. Sometimes I think he would be proud, not just of the rebuilt cabin, but of how I stood my ground and fought for what was right. And if anyone from an HOA ever shows up at my door with a clipboard again, well, I've got a filing cabinet full of property records ready to go. My name is still on every legal document in the county, and that's something no one can bulldoze away.